Minseo Lee moved with the grace of someone who was used to going unnoticed. She folded silk scarves with precision, adjusted handbags on polished glass shelves, and smiled politely at each customer who walked through the tall, mirrored doors of Belle Étoile, one of Gangnam's most exclusive boutiques. Dressed in a simple cream blouse and dark slacks, her appearance was elegant but modest, a reflection of her determination to blend in rather than stand out. She was a weekend employee, officially a part-time sales associate. Unofficially, she was the daughter of Dong-hae Lee, a name that echoed through the upper echelons of Korea's luxury industry. Minseo never spoke of him. To most people, she was just another quiet university student juggling classes and work. Even the store manager, who prided himself on knowing everything about his staff, only believed she came from a decent family. He had no idea she'd been dropped off for her interview in a chauffeured black sedan that turned the corner as soon as she stepped out. On this particular Saturday, the boutique had the soft hum of classical music playing beneath the gentle buzz of conversation. The scent of lavender and bergamot floated through the air, a signature fragrance chosen by headquarters to calm the nerves of high-end clients. Minseo moved silently between displays, making sure each item sat at the perfect angle. Her shifts were long, but she preferred it that way. Working gave her a sense of normalcy, something her life rarely offered. Outside, the streets of Gangnam pulsed with life. Shoppers swarmed sidewalks, cafes overflowed with laughter, and sleek cars zipped past luxury storefronts. Inside, however, Belle Étoile remained its own world, polished, refined, and frozen, in curated calm. Minseo checked the time. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The boutique had been unusually quiet. A middle-aged couple had just left after purchasing a limited edition watch, and another customer lingered in the fitting area. She took a moment to straighten the floral display at the entrance. As she stepped back to examine her work, the boutique's atmosphere shifted. The doors opened with a chime. A group of 4 young women entered, each dressed in designer coats and stilettos, their laughter sharp and controlled. At their center walked Soo-jin Kang, a name anyone even mildly plugged into Seoul's social scene would recognize. The BY, heiress to a telecommunications empire, Soo-jin was known for her beauty, her connections, and a particular brand of cruelty masked as charm. She walked like she owned every room she entered. In a way, she often did. Minseo immediately bowed. As was expected, "Welcome to Belle Étoile. Let me know if there's anything I can help you with." Soo-jin barely acknowledged her. Her eyes scanned the boutique with detached disinterest before she turned to her entourage. "Is this the new collection they were talking about?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough for everyone in the boutique to hear. Her friends murmured approval, picking up bags and commenting on colors. One of them glanced at Minseo and whispered something that made the others chuckle. Minseo felt the familiar tightening in her chest but said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence could be armor. She returned to organizing a display of limited edition wallets. But Soo-jin wasn't done. She moved closer, her heels clicking, with confidence. "Do you work here every weekend?" she asked suddenly. Minseo looked up, startled. "Yes, I do." Soo-jin smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That must be humbling." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Minseo offered a small nod. "It teaches me a lot." "I'm sure it does," Soo-jin said, her tone laced with amusement. She turned to her friends. "Can you imagine? Folding scarves all day. My fingers would break." More laughter. The sound echoed off the boutique's pristine surfaces, drawing curious glances from nearby customers. Minseo stood still, her face composed. She had heard worse, she had endured more. But as she turned to restock a shelf, her hands trembled slightly. She tucked them behind her back and focused on her breathing. The moment would pass. It always did. What Minseo didn't see, what none of them noticed, was the quiet figure near the back of the boutique. A man in his 50s, dressed in an unassuming grey suit, stood observing the scene with sharp eyes. He said nothing. He didn't intervene. But his expression darkened as he watched the way Soo-jin spoke to the quiet girl behind the counter. For now he remained still, But the silence in the boutique was about to unravel. The tension had barely settled when Sujin Kang moved deeper into the boutique, her sharp heels striking the marble floor like a warning. She stopped by a glass display of handbags, tracing a finger along the edge of a crocodile leather clutch, as if considering whether it was worth her attention. Her friends hovered nearby, all of them playing their parts. The silent observer, the nodding admirer, the one who echoed Sujin's disdain with well-timed giggles. Minseo had retreated slightly, pretending to reorganize a display of silk blouses, but she was aware of every step Sujin took. There was a rhythm to this kind of humiliation, casual cruelty dressed in designer labels. Then it began. "Excuse me," Sujin said, loud enough for the entire store to hear. Her voice sliced through the boutique's serene atmosphere. "Are these the only colors this bag comes in?" Minseo turned, polite as ever. "Yes, ma'am. This season, the designer chose a limited palette to maintain exclusivity. We currently have black, ivory, and emerald." Sujin tilted her head, pretending to consider it. Then her eyes flicked down to Minseo's shoes, plain black loafers, polished but simple. Her smile returned, sharp and glittering. "You explain things like someone who memorized a catalogue. Do you even own one of these bags?" Minseo hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because there was no answer that would disarm Sujin's intent. Still, she replied softly, "No, I do not." "Of course not," Sujin scoffed. She turned to her friends, who erupted into knowing laughter. Why would she? Can you imagine someone like her walking into a place like this to buy, not to serve? The insult hit with precision. A customer near the sunglasses section looked up, frowning slightly. One of the junior staff paused mid-fold. The manager, from behind the counter, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Minseo stood still, her eyes fixed on the bag in Sujin's hand. "You have such a soft voice," one of the other girls chimed in mockingly. "It's almost like she's afraid to speak." "It's not just her voice," Sujin added, tilting her head again. "Look at how she stands, so tense, like she's bracing for impact. It's almost poetic." Minseo remained silent, her breath steady, despite the heat rising in her chest. She had been taught to endure, to carry her own weight without dragging anyone else into her storms. That included her identity, her past, and her father's empire. She swallowed the urge to speak. Then Sujin stepped closer. "You know, it's sad. A store this elegant, with a staff member who looks like she belongs in a school cafeteria. Who hired you? Someone asleep at the desk?" The store fell silent. It wasn't just the insult. It was the way she said it, as if Minseo's presence itself was an offense to luxury. Her friends looked at one another, unsure whether to laugh or back away. The atmosphere had shifted. Something about the look on Minseo's face had changed. Minseo didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply raised her eyes to meet Sujin's and said calmly, "I'm here to work. That's what I do. I won't apologize for that." It was not loud. It was not defiant. But in its simplicity it landed harder than any insult. The silence was now sharp. Sujin blinked, thrown off by the unexpected steadiness. For the first time her smile faltered. She looked around, as if seeking reassurance from her entourage, but they were quieter now, watching the exchange more warily. From the back of the store, the man in the grey suit remained still. His eyes never left Minseo. Minseo turned away again, calmly continuing her task, but the tremor in her hand betrayed her effort. She placed a blouse back on the hanger with meticulous care, pretending not to notice the lingering stares. Sujin didn't say another word. She returned to browsing, but the air around her had changed. Her charm now felt brittle, her entourage subdued. And somewhere, unnoticed by most, a handheld phone was recording. Quietly, steadily. The lens focused not on the handbags or the sparkling displays, but on the girl who had just stood her ground without revealing a single secret. Minseo walked quietly toward the display table at the center of the boutique, her hands now steady, though her chest still ached with the effort it took to remain composed. The soft clicking of heels and the rustle of designer fabrics resumed. Behind her, but the earlier laughter had vanished. A strange unease hung in the air, not loud but present. Sujin's group continued to browse, feigning interest in items they barely glanced at, their attention shifting occasionally back to the girl they had just tried to reduce to nothing. What none of them realized was that their every word had been captured. At the rear of the boutique, next to a wall adorned with seasonal accessories, a staff member named Hyun, quiet and observant, had held his phone steady from beneath a display counter. He hadn't planned to film anything that day, but the moment Sujin's voice began to rise and the mockery began, something instinctual took over. He knew Min-seo, not well, but enough to know she didn't deserve any of what was happening, and he knew that people like Sujin rarely faced consequences, unless there was proof, so he filmed. The frame wasn't perfect, the audio a little muffled, but the essentials were there. The arrogance, the laughter, the cruel commentary, and finally, Min-seo's quiet resistance. Hyun didn't know who she really was. None of the staff did. But something in the way she had met Sujin's gaze without flinching, something in the stillness that followed had left a mark. Meanwhile, at the front of the boutique, the energy continued to shift. Sujin, still simmering from Min-seo's composed response, moved toward the counter, a flash of irritation behind her polished smile. She leaned slightly toward the manager, Mr. Park, who had been pretending to busy himself with inventory reports. "Excuse me," Sujin said, just loud enough for nearby staff and customers to hear. "I'd like to speak with someone in charge." Mr. Park looked up, his eyes flitting nervously to the side. "Of course, Ms. Kang, I'm the store manager. How may I assist you?" Sujin crossed her arms. "That girl, the one in the ivory blouse, she was incredibly rude. I asked a simple question, and she answered me with attitude. Is this how your staff treats clients?" Mr. Park paled. He hadn't seen the full interaction, only caught pieces from behind the counter. But the name Kang echoed in his head like a warning bell. He couldn't afford to offend someone from that family, not with quarterly performance reviews coming up. I'm very sorry to hear that," he stammered. "I'll speak with her immediately." "Publicly," Sujin added, her tone sugary and sharp. "It's important to set an example." Mr. Park hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He turned to Min-seo, who had just placed the final blouse in the display. "Min-seo," he called, his voice louder than necessary. "Come here, please." She approached without a word, her face calm despite the sudden weight of attention. Customers were now openly watching. One of the other salesgirls stood frozen, a folded scarf in her hands. Hyun slipped his phone into his pocket, heart pounding. Mr. Park straightened his tie. "I've received a complaint regarding your behavior. Ms. Kang informs me you were discourteous." Min-seo didn't reply right away. Her eyes flicked to Sujin, who was now leaning casually against the counter, her expression triumphant. "I was not discourteous," Min-seo said quietly, but clearly. "I responded to her questions respectfully." She just stood there, like a statue, Sujin interrupted, smiling tightly. "Clearly doesn't understand customer service." Mr. Park caught between fear and protocol sighed. "Regardless of intent, perception matters. We pride ourselves on elegance and grace, not confrontations. Please apologize to the client." There was a beat of silence. Min-seo didn't move. Then, after a long breath, she bowed slightly toward Sujin. "If my response was perceived as inappropriate, I apologize. It was not a confession. It was a surrender crafted with dignity. But to anyone listening without context, it sounded like guilt." Mr. Park nodded quickly, eager to end the scene. "Thank you. You may take a short break in the back." Min-seo walked toward the storage area without looking back. The door closed softly behind her. Inside, away from the stairs and the polished surfaces, she leaned against the wall and allowed the weight of the moment to settle. Her hands trembled again, and this time a single tear escaped. Not for the insult. That she could withstand. But for the silence. The kind of silence that comes from knowing you could end everything with a single word, a single name, and choosing not to. She pulled out her phone, stared at the blank screen for a long time, and typed a message to her father. It was short. "Appa, I had a difficult day. I'll tell you more later. Don't worry, I'm okay." She didn't send it right away. She hesitated, reading it again and again, Then finally, with a deep breath, she pressed send. Back in the main showroom, Hyun quietly stepped into the staff room and opened a private messaging app used by the company's internal community. He uploaded the video without comment, sharing it with a small group that included a handful of employees from various flagship stores and, unknowingly, one executive who reported directly to the chairman's office. He didn't expect much. He just needed someone to see. And someone had. In the quiet of the storage room, Minseo steadied her breathing. The scent of cardboard, leather polish, and faint rosewater lingered in the air, familiar, grounding. She wiped away the tear from her cheek with the back of her hand, not out of shame, but to restore the mask of calm that had become second nature. She did not regret apologizing, nor staying silent about her identity. But the sting of being accused publicly, with no chance to explain, lingered like smoke in her lungs. She reached for a stack of inventory slips, mechanically checking SKU, numbers and folding tissue paper, over a shipment of silk scarves. It was the kind of task she normally found soothing. Today it only deepened her isolation. Outside, the boutique resumed its polished rhythm. Customers browsed. Conversations lowered to hushed tones. Sujin had moved to the fitting area, now, playing the part of the indulgent shopper, trying on a coat and posing for her friends. Her earlier triumph over the nobody behind the counter gave her a renewed sense of authority. Meanwhile, Mr. Park remained behind the counter, his jaw tight. He'd acted out of instinct, the survival reflex of someone in middle management. But even he felt the pang of discomfort. There had been something unsettling in how Minseo had bowed, how composed she had remained in the face of it all. It was too graceful, too deliberate. He pushed the thought aside. Then came the second blow. Sojin stepped out of the fitting room, coat draped over her shoulders. "This one's nice," she said, walking back to the front with measured confidence. "But I want someone else to assist me, not that girl." Mr. Park nodded quickly. "Of course, I'll send someone to help right away." Sujin smiled, then turned to her friends. "Honestly, someone like that working here. It's embarrassing. People like her bring down the brand." A new silence settled, one that wasn't from awe but discomfort. Customers nearby exchanged glances. One older woman, holding a pearl-encrusted clutch, narrowed her eyes in disapproval. A younger man shifted awkwardly near the perfume section. The boutique had witnessed arrogance before. It was part of luxury retail. But this was different. This was targeted. Still no one spoke. Mr. Park, eager to smooth things over, turned to a junior staff member. "Jisoo, please assist Ms. Kang. And someone bring Minseo's things. She's done for the day." The words fell with finality. Jisoo froze, her lips parting slightly, unsure if she had heard right. "Sir, you're sending her home?" Mr. Park didn't answer, only gave a curt nod. A staff member slipped into the back and returned minutes later with Minseo's blazer and purse. In the storage room, Minseo was folding a shipment box when the door opened. It was Hyun. They want you to go home," he said quietly. Minseo turned slowly. "Why?" He hesitated. Mr. Park said, "You should rest, that's all." She nodded once. "Okay." She took her blazer, placed her purse over her shoulder, and walked out without meeting anyone's eyes. The boutique felt colder than before. Customers looked at her with sympathy or curiosity. Her colleagues avoided eye contact. Sujin smirked openly as she passed, but Minseo gave her nothing. No reaction, no sign of hurt. Just a steady, silent walk to the front door. Then, as she reached the threshold, she paused. The entire boutique seemed to hold its breath. She turned slightly, looked at Mr. Park, and said in a calm, steady voice, "Thank you for today." Then she left. Outside, the streets of Gangnam bustled with life. Neon signs flickered, horns blared in the distance, and people rushed past with coffee cups and shopping bags. Minseo stepped into the crowd like smoke, disappearing into the wind. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from her father had arrived. "Call me when you get home." She didn't respond. Not yet. Back inside Belle Étoile, the atmosphere had changed. Sujin resumed shopping, but the energy around her had shifted. Even her entourage was less enthusiastic. Jisoo, now assisting. Her was polite but distant. Hyun returned to the staff room, his hands shaking slightly. He checked his phone. The video he had uploaded was now being shared beyond the small group. Comments had started to appear. People were recognizing voices, recognizing faces. In the corporate headquarters of Lee Han Group, the luxury conglomerate that owned Belle Étoile and dozens of other high-end brands, a regional operations director named Ji-woo Nam received a notification. She opened the message without much thought, but her expression hardened as she watched the footage. Her fingers flew across the screen, forwarding it to a single private contact. Dong-hae Lee. That night, in a penthouse overlooking the Han River, Dong-hae Lee watched the video in silence. He saw his daughter stand with dignity. He saw the way she was humiliated, how she chose restraint over power, silence over spectacle. He said nothing. He did not call her. He did not reply. But he stood from his desk, reached for his phone, and began dialing. What followed would not be loud. It would be precise and irreversible. The apartment was dark when Min Seo arrived, the hallway light, casting long shadows across the pale wooden floor. She slipped off her shoes, dropped her bag by the door and stood in silence. The hum of the city outside filtered faintly through the windows, but inside it was perfectly still. No music, no conversation, just the echo of everything that had happened hours earlier replaying in her mind. She walked to the small kitchenette, poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Her phone sat on the table, screen lit with the unread message from her father. She hadn't opened it again since reading the words. "Call me when you get home." She didn't. Instead, she tapped out a new message. Short, simple, stripped of all the weight she carried. "Appa, I had a difficult day. I'll tell you more later. Don't worry, I'm okay." She stared at it for a while. Her thumb hovered over the send button before finally pressing it. There was no explanation, no mention of Soo-jin, no hint of the video now circulating, just enough to let him know she was still standing. She placed the phone face down and walked to the living room. The silence comforted her. It gave her space to breathe, to be just Min Seo, not the daughter of a powerful CEO, not the invisible girl behind a counter, not the silent target of a socialite's venom. Just a 22-year-old woman trying to live her life without the weight of a name. But across the city, the quiet was being shattered. The video Hyun had recorded, just under 3 minutes long, had already reached people who recognized more than just Soo-jin Kang's voice. Executives, assistants, even a few department heads who had passed Min Seo in the halls of the company, without knowing who she truly was. Ji-woo Nam had watched it first in her office after hours, her jaw tightening with every second. She didn't need confirmation. The posture, the voice, the eyes. That was Min Seo Lee, the chairman's daughter. Her hands trembled only slightly as she sent the clip through the company's internal communication system, not to the entire organization, but to a select few. People who would understand the gravity, people who would act without being told. By the time Dong-hae Lee opened the video, it had already circulated through 2 levels of upper management. He sat in his home office, a room filled with awards, framed photographs and books arranged by color. The curtains were drawn. His phone rested on a leather-bound planner. When he pressed play, he watched in complete silence. He didn't pause, didn't flinch, just observed. He saw the insult. He saw the forced apology. He saw the quiet grace with which Min Seo had handled it all, and he saw something else, the fear in the staff, the complacency, the way power had been allowed to mock humility unchecked. When the video ended, he stared at the screen for a long time. Then, without a word, he reached for his landline, not the mobile device used for daily communications, but the secure internal one used for directives that required no questions. The first call he made was to the Director of Operations for Belle Étoile. The second was to the Chief Legal Officer. The third was to a man who never appeared in company directories, but whose role was well understood by those who needed to know. A private investigator with access to archives, surveillance, systems and social media extraction tools. No rage, no shouting, just action. Dong-hae Lee did not react like a father. He acted like a man whose principles had been breached within the very system he had spent decades building. By dawn, inquiries had been launched. Security footage from the boutique was requested. HR teams were contacted. Policies were reviewed. What had begun as a casual cruelty in a luxury boutique was now rippling into the infrastructure of an empire. Back in Min Seo's apartment, she was unaware of the storm unfolding behind boardroom doors. She sat cross-legged on her couch, a bowl of rice porridge in her lap, watching a documentary with the volume low. Her phone buzzed with notifications, none from her father, none from her workplace. Just friends sending memes, classmates reminding her about group assignments, and one from Hyun. He had simply written, "I'm sorry for what happened. People are talking. You should know that." She didn't reply. Not yet. She didn't want to know what was being said. Didn't want to open that door. But far above her world of part-time shifts and quiet resilience, others were opening doors on her behalf. Powerful, soundless doors that led to consequences. By the end of the next day, the boutique's management team had been called into an emergency meeting. A representative from headquarters arrived unannounced. The staff were instructed to remain calm and answer questions truthfully. And Sujin Kang, she would receive an unexpected visitor, someone asking about her behavior not only at Belle Étoile, but at several other boutiques in recent months. Someone who wasn't impressed by designer labels or inherited influence. Someone sent not by accident, but with a purpose. It was nearly midnight when Dong-hae Lee finally stood from his desk, the city below him a grid of flickering lights and muffled traffic. He had made 6 calls over the past 2 hours, none of them ordinary. Each one initiated a different branch of response, legal, operational, reputational, yet he remained silent throughout the process, his expression unreadable, his commands succinct. To the outside world, Dong-hae was a quiet titan, rarely seen in the media, his influence always filtered through executive proxies. But those within Lee Han Group understood the unspoken hierarchy, and when he moved directly, it was never without consequence. He didn't call Min Seo, not yet. He had watched her in the video more times than he would admit, not for evidence, but for clarity. In each viewing he saw something new, the slight tremor in her hand, the way she straightened a blouse after being insulted, the firm set of her jaw as she bowed to someone who didn't deserve it. She hadn't reached out for help. She hadn't revealed her name. And that, more than anything, pierced him, not because she had been wronged, but because she had believed she had to endure it alone. He sat again and pulled open a drawer. Inside was an envelope, thick ivory paper embossed with gold lettering. It was a letter Min Seo had written him 2 years ago, when she insisted on living independently during university, refusing the private dorm, the chauffeured car, the branded internship he had arranged. It was her voice in ink, steady and respectful. "I want to know who I am without the name. If I fail, let it be because I wasn't enough, not because I didn't try." He hadn't stopped her. Now he questioned if he should have. Meanwhile, at Belle Étoile, the boutique remained closed for its routine Monday cleaning. But the closure was extended without warning. The staff received an early morning message from headquarters. Mandatory in-store audit. Report in uniform. Senior leadership present. Confusion swept through the group chat. Mr. Park didn't respond. Hyun simply sent a message to Jisoo. This isn't just an audit. By 10 o'clock in the morning, a sleek black car arrived at the boutique. A man in a tailored navy suit stepped out, followed by a woman holding a digital tablet. Neither introduced themselves to the staff, but everyone felt the shift. The woman addressed them with measured authority. "We are here to review an incident from Saturday. Please remain available for individual interviews." Sujin, unaware of the visit, was having brunch at a rooftop cafe in Itaewon, uploading a filtered photo of her matcha latte. Her phone buzzed with messages, a few compliments, a handful of hearts, and one unread text from an unfamiliar number. "Sujin Kang, we request your availability for a formal discussion regarding events at Belle Étoile Gangnam. Details forthcoming." She stared at the message, confused. Then a second message arrived. No text, just a link. She tapped it and watched herself, smiling, mocking, insulting. The video played without pause. She didn't finish it. Her hand trembled slightly as she dropped her phone onto the table, her chest tightening. She looked around the cafe, suddenly unsure who might be watching. The noise of clinking glasses and distant laughter sounded too loud, the air too bright. At the boutique, Mr. Park's face was drawn and pale as he sat before the two visitors from headquarters. He answered questions in careful phrases, occasionally glancing toward the break room. "I didn't witness the full exchange," he repeated. "But Ms. Kang is a highly influential customer. I was trying to protect the store's reputation." "And your staff's dignity?" the woman asked without raising her voice. He faltered. I may have misjudged the situation." Outside the room, staff waited in tense silence. Minseo's name wasn't spoken aloud, but it lingered in every whispered glance, every pause in conversation. None of them knew where she was. She hadn't returned since Saturday, but her presence was sharper than ever. Hyun was called in next. He didn't hide that he had filmed the incident. "I didn't upload it to social media," he said carefully. "Just to the internal staff group. I didn't want it to be ignored." The man in the navy suit nodded. It wasn't. By afternoon, word began to spread beyond the store. Other locations received cryptic memos. Review protocol on customer conduct and employee protection, new standards incoming. Executives whispered about a directive that hadn't gone through the usual layers, a sign that it had come from the top. Minseo, meanwhile, spent the day on campus. She attended a literature seminar, took notes during a business ethics lecture, and ate lunch beneath a quiet tree in the university's central courtyard. Her phone remained silent. She didn't check the news. She didn't open her messages. She needed a day to feel normal again. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the city lights flickered on one by one, a car pulled up to the curb outside her apartment building. It was not the one her father usually sent. It bore no company emblem. But the driver stepped out, checked a file, and nodded once toward the building. Inside the vehicle, a copy of a printed still from the video lay on the seat beside a folder labeled with a single word: priority. The morning began like any other at Belle Étoile Gangnam, but everyone inside the boutique felt it. The tension hanging just beneath the surface, the forced smiles, the sudden silence when footsteps approached. Staff had arrived, earlier than usual, following a curt message from headquarters. Mr. Park was already in the manager's office, pacing. His tie was crooked, his face pale with unease. At 9 o'clock sharp, the boutique's glass doors opened, not for customers, but for a team from the company's executive branch. Leading them was Director Han, the regional head of Lee Han Group's luxury retail division. A composed man with silver-rimmed glasses and the reputation of someone who never raised his voice yet always got results. He did not walk in with drama. He entered with intent. Behind him, two other high-ranking managers followed, tablets in hand. The staff assembled quickly in the showroom. Some stood rigidly by the shelves, others by the counter. No one spoke. Mr. Park emerged last, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Director Han," he greeted, attempting a smile. "We weren't expecting—" "You received the notice yesterday," Han interrupted calmly. "Please gather your leadership team. We will begin immediately." Within minutes, the boutique's back office transformed into an impromptu boardroom. The senior managers took seats, and the staff were dismissed temporarily, asked to remain available in the lounge. Everyone knew something serious was happening. This wasn't an inventory issue or a customer complaint. This was a reckoning. Director Han stood at the head of the improvised table, a tablet in his hand. "We are here to discuss a matter that has now reached the executive level," he began. "On Saturday, an incident occurred that violated the key company's standards of conduct, ethics, and brand integrity." No one spoke. He tapped the screen and turned it to face Mr. Park and the others. The video played again. The insults, the laughter, the forced apology. Some in the room hadn't seen it in full before. They sat in stunned silence as Minseo's calm response echoed in the background. When the video ended, Director Han looked up. "Does anyone here believe this represents the values of Belle Étoile?" Mr. Park opened his mouth, then closed it. Another manager tried. "It was an isolated—" "Not isolated," Han said sharply. though his voice remained low. This is not about one girl being insulted. This is about how our staff responded, about a store manager prioritizing social standing over truth, about a failure of judgment that could have endangered this brand's reputation at the highest level. He paused, letting the words settle. "Do you know who that employee is?" he asked. The room was still. "Her name is Minseo Lee," Han said evenly, "and she is the daughter of Chairman Donghae Lee." A collective breath was held. Mr. Park's eyes widened. A whisper of disbelief passed between two supervisors. "She never disclosed it," Han continued. "She did not ask for special treatment. She did not use her name to defend herself. She simply did her job, which evidently was not enough to be treated with respect." The silence that followed was absolute. "In light of this," he said, placing the tablet on the table, "effective immediately, this location will undergo a leadership restructure. Mr. Park, you are relieved of your duties. Other members of this management team will be reassigned pending review." Mr. Park stood slowly, his face blank. "This is not punishment," Han clarified. "It is accountability. The chairman has made it clear that our standards are not just for customers, they are for everyone, and especially our people." The meeting ended without applause or confrontation. The executives moved swiftly, quietly. Within the hour, word spread among the staff. Mr. Park was escorted out with his personal belongings in a small box. A new interim manager arrived before noon. Jisoo cried softly in the break room. Hyun said nothing, just kept folding scarves, his movements careful and exact. And above them all, in the sleek offices of Lee Han Group, statements were being drafted. Internal memos were prepared. A quiet apology to Minseo was delivered via email, thanking her for her professionalism, her discretion and her courage. But Minseo hadn't read it. She was walking through the campus garden, trying to silence the noise in her mind. She had heard whispers at school. Someone had forwarded the video. Someone else had made a passing comment about that girl in Gangnam. Her phone buzzed endlessly now, but she had muted most notifications. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to be herself. At that moment, in a separate corner of the city, Sujin Kang was sitting in the private lounge of a wellness spa, scrolling through news headlines. The video had not yet gone viral publicly, but it was reaching people who mattered: sponsors, partners, socialites. One by one, text messages grew colder, invitations disappeared, the tone changed. Then a new message arrived, this one from her father. "Meet me tonight, bring your lawyer." She dropped the phone into her lap, her hands cold despite the room's warmth. In just 48 hours, everything had shifted, not with press releases, not with outrage, but with silence and precision. The glass of rosé in Sujin Kang's hand trembled slightly as she sat alone in her father's study. The room, lined with books and family portraits, had once felt like a sanctuary. Now it felt like a courtroom. Her father, Juhwan Kang, stood behind his desk, arms crossed, reading the report his assistant had handed him earlier that evening. It wasn't just the video from Belle Étoile anymore. It was a collection. Screenshots of chat logs, security footage from other boutiques, statements from employees at luxury shops across Seoul, each one echoing the same sentiment: arrogant behavior, verbal abuse, entitlement. Some dated back over 2 years. It was more than a pattern. It was a legacy of cruelty. Sujin shifted in her seat. "Appa, it was just a misunderstanding." Her father held up a hand. "You humiliated the daughter of Donghae Lee," he said, his voice controlled but deadly. "In his own store, in front of customers, while being recorded." She opened her mouth to reply but found no words. "Do you know who he is?" Juhwan continued, not waiting for an answer. "Do you know how much business we've done with Lee Han Group over the last 5 years? Do you understand the damage this could cause?" "I didn't know who she was," Sujin cried, the veneer of composure finally cracking. "She looked like a staff girl. I didn't say anything that bad." He slammed a folder on the desk, cutting her off. "You didn't know and you acted like that. Imagine if you had known. Would you have begged her forgiveness? Sent her gifts? Called her Uni?" His disgust was clear. Sujin looked away, jaw tight. The air between them thickened with silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "Are you going to cut me off?" "No," he said sharply. "But you will be held accountable, starting now." He walked around the desk and placed a sheet of paper in front of her. "You'll issue a public apology. Tonight. It will be reviewed and approved before you post. You will deactivate your social accounts until further notice. You will withdraw from the events you're scheduled to attend this month." Sujin's pride flared. "You want me to disappear?" "I want you to survive," he snapped. "If that means disappearing for a while, so be it." Outside their private walls, the world was already shifting. The internal networks of Li Han Group were abuzz with quiet recalibrations. Clients affiliated with the Kang family had been flagged for review. Influencers known to associate with Sujin were receiving polite but firm notices about postponements and policy reviews. In luxury circles, relationships were currency, and right now Sujin's name was losing value. Meanwhile, Minseo returned home late from her evening class. The sun had set hours earlier, but the city still pulsed with light. She unlocked her door, slipped off her shoes, and found a bouquet on her table. Tall white lilies accompanied by a note in elegant script. "Your grace in silence did not go unnoticed. With respect and admiration, LHG." She stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to feel touched or exposed. She didn't want attention. She didn't want flowers. She wanted to be unseen again, to fade back into the safety of her anonymity. But the tide was moving without her now, pulled by forces she couldn't stop. That night she finally opened her inbox. Messages from executives, PR managers, even the CEO of Belle Etoile's retail division filled her screen. They praised her strength, apologized for the treatment she endured, and asked if she would consider speaking to the staff in a private session to inspire reflection and growth. She closed the window without replying. Far across the city, Sujin sat in her room, staring at the draft of her apology on a glowing screen. It read, "I deeply regret my behavior at Belle Etoile Gangnam. I spoke without consideration and acted without empathy. I am reflecting on my actions and the hurt I may have caused, and I am committed to becoming a better person through this experience." She hated every word, not because they weren't true, but because they weren't hers. She pressed send. The statement was published within minutes on her social channels and picked up by gossip blogs and news aggregators within the hour. The backlash was immediate. Some saw it as hollow. Others demanded more. A few defended her, but even they did, so cautiously, aware of how far her influence had already fallen. In private, Donghae Lee read the apology once, then deleted it. He had not intervened to demand it. He had not spoken to the media, nor made any public move. That was not his way. But his people, the quiet force behind Li Han Group, had done what needed to be done. By morning, 3 boutiques in Seoul had banned Sujin from entering. 2 event organizers removed her name from their guest lists. A planned collaboration between her personal brand and a European luxury line was quietly scrapped. Her world was folding in on itself, slowly, strategically, without noise. Minseo received a message from Hyun just after breakfast. She posted an apology. "People are starting to realize who you are." Minseo stared at her screen, a strange tightness in her chest. The truth was no longer hers to protect. It was now public property. The boutique had changed. Not in decor. The white marble floors still gleamed, the displays remained immaculate, and the faint scent of bergamot still floated through the air. But there was something different in the way people moved, in how they spoke, in how they looked at each other, and especially at Minseo Lee. She returned to Belle Etoile quietly, wearing the same uniform, carrying the same understated handbag, with her long black hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. But when she stepped through the door that morning, every head turned. "Good morning, Minseo," said Jisoo, her voice just a little too careful. Hyun offered a small nod. "Glad you're back." Even the new interim manager, a woman named Ms. Kwon, sent directly from headquarters, walked over to greet her personally. "If there's anything you need," she said with a soft smile, "you come directly to me. Understood?" Minseo only nodded, murmured a polite thank you, and headed to the stockroom without further comment. She had expected whispers, maybe even stares. What she hadn't expected was the silence, the kind that came from respect, or guilt, or fear. She could feel it in every conversation that stopped when she passed, every co-worker who double-checked. Their tone around her. She had worked here for over a year and had been invisible the entire time. Now suddenly she was someone. But no one said the name aloud. They didn't have to. That afternoon, a delivery arrived from headquarters, a large bouquet of white orchids and a handwritten card in embossed gold. To Min Seo Lee, thank you for representing the values we stand for. Your strength honors this brand. It sat on the service counter for all to see. No one dared move it. Later, when she stepped out to assist a customer, a couple of regulars greeted her differently. "Ah, you're the young lady with such elegance," said one woman, smiling warmly. "My daughter showed me a clip of your encounter. I must say you handled yourself beautifully." Min Seo bowed slightly, but her face betrayed nothing. A middle-aged man browsing wristwatches leaned in. "Your father must be proud," he said, then added quickly, "though I suppose he's proud for different reasons now." She smiled faintly, not correcting him, not confirming anything, just letting the moment pass. Even the boutique's tone had shifted. Mr. Park was gone. The oppressive hierarchy he had enforced, subtle but ever-present, had dissolved overnight. Now Ms. Kwon asked for opinions during morning briefings. Staff were invited to share concerns. A weekly feedback form was introduced, anonymously, that first, and for the first time everyone was being heard. But Min Seo remained on the sidelines. She didn't ask for more hours, didn't take breaks with the others. She kept her head down, worked her tasks, and returned home without comment. Yet her presence changed the boutique more than any policy ever could. She had become a living reminder, not of punishment but of principle. At university, the changes were even more discreet but just as noticeable. Professors who once barely looked her way now paused to greet her. Classmates who hadn't spoken to her in months now asked to sit beside her during lectures. Some did it out of curiosity, others out of guilt, and a few, she could tell, out of fear, as if proximity to her might grant them immunity from their own missteps. She tolerated it all with the same quiet strength. What she didn't know was that behind the scenes, her name was being whispered in meeting rooms she had never entered. Executives at Lee Han Group were debating how to handle the situation going forward. Dong-hae Lee had not issued a public statement. He had not summoned his daughter to his office. But every action taken, every shift in policy, every message sent from corporate had his fingerprints. In private, he had instructed that no one was to reveal Min Seo's identity publicly. No press releases, no internal bulletins. "She has the right to decide what name she wears," he had told the board. "Let her lead without a crown." But his silence did not mean inaction. All employees were now undergoing a new ethics training program, one developed in part by the brand's legal and HR teams, with direct oversight from the chairman's office. Boutique managers across the country were being audited. Customer conduct guidelines were being rewritten to include protections for frontline staff. For the first time in the company's history, the word dignity appeared in official training materials, and the changes were already being felt. Min Seo walked into the staff room one afternoon to find Hyun sitting alone, staring at his phone. He looked up, startled. "I didn't mean to—" "It's fine," she said, placing her bag in the locker. There was a pause. "You know," he said carefully, "I didn't know who you were. I just filmed because it felt wrong. What she did." Min Seo nodded. "Thank you." He swallowed. "Are you okay?" That question, so simple, so earnest, struck her more than the flowers or the corporate apologies. She hesitated. Then, softly, "I don't know, but I'm trying." He smiled. "Well, and we're glad you're here." Min Seo didn't reply, but something in her shoulders softened. Across the city, Soo-jin Kang sat in her apartment, blinds drawn, phone silent. Her lawyer had advised her to keep a low profile. Her father had instructed her to shut everything down, brand deals, interviews, even her charitable appearances. She had become toxic. No one said it out loud. They didn't need to. Every silence was its own sentence. Every delay in response, every unanswered call, told her exactly where she stood. And though she still refused to say Minseo's name, she thought about her every day. Not with hatred, not with envy, but with a confusion that bordered on awe. She had tried to break her, and instead, she had made her unforgettable. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the unexpected happened. The boutique had opened at its usual time, and the team was following their normal routines, steaming blouses, polishing glass displays, adjusting lighting angles to highlight the newest arrivals. Minseo was at the accessory counter, arranging a new shipment of pearl-inlaid brooches. Ms. Kwon was reviewing stock reports in the back office, and Jisoo was helping a client choose between two evening clutches. At 10:30, the front doors opened with the soft chime of the bell. No one paid much attention at first. The boutique often welcomed well-dressed men in expensive suits, but within seconds, the atmosphere shifted. Because this man was not just well-dressed, he was known. Tall, composed, and moving with the kind of quiet gravity that made the world move around him, Dong-hae Lee stepped through the entrance, accompanied only by a discreet aide who remained by the door. Conversations died. Ms. Kwon stepped out from the back room, eyes widening slightly. Hyun froze behind the cash desk. Jisoo dropped the silver pen she was holding. Minseo didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She felt it, the unmistakable presence of her father, not as family but as power incarnate. Her breath caught for a brief moment before she placed the final brooch down and slowly stood straight. Dong-hae walked forward calmly without spectacle, his eyes scanning the boutique as if inspecting a place he had built with his own hands. In many ways, he had. Belle Étoile was not just another brand under the Lee Han Group umbrella. It was his vision. And today he had come in person, not as a CEO but as a father with unfinished business. When he reached the accessory counter, Minseo finally turned. Their eyes met. No titles, no pretense. Just the quiet understanding of two people who had spent years walking different paths toward the same truth. Dong-hae smiled softly, a rare expression, subtle and sincere. "Minseo," he said, his voice warm, unmistakably proud, "I came to see how you're doing." The silence in the boutique became absolute. Every employee stood still. Every customer turned to watch. It was not the words he spoke, but the way he spoke them, familiar, intimate, protective. Minseo offered a small nod. "I'm well." Dong-hae looked around again, then back at her. "This place is important to you," he said simply. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He turned to face the rest of the staff and the clients, his voice rising just enough to carry through the boutique. "For those who don't know," he said, "this is my daughter. She's been working here for over a year. She never asked for recognition, never used her name, and never demanded anything." The room felt like it was holding its breath. Dong-hae's expression was calm, but his words were sharp. "She came here to learn what it means to work, to serve, to understand people, and I've let her do that. But now I think it's time some things were said aloud." He turned back to Minseo, and this time his voice dropped to something only she could hear. "You showed me who you are, not through names or numbers or positions, but through grace. You're stronger than I imagined." She blinked, but the tears did not fall. Not here, not now. Behind them, Sujin Kang, who had walked in minutes earlier, completely unaware of the storm she was stepping into, now stood frozen. By the entrance, a silk scarf clutched in one hand. Her face went pale. She had recognized the man immediately, and when she heard the words, "This is my daughter," her heart dropped. Her eyes found Minseo, who stood not with smugness or superiority, but with quiet composure, as if nothing in the world had changed, even though everything had. Seo-jin took a step back. Dong-hae saw her. He gave no sign of recognition, no anger, no disdain. He simply looked through her, then turned his attention back to the staff. "I want to thank those who treated my daughter with respect, not because of her name, but because of her presence. You acted with integrity. The rest," he said, his voice tightening ever so slightly, have already learned that every action carries weight, and that consequences follow choice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The boutique remained still as he stepped aside, allowing Minseo to resume her place. He gave her a final nod, then walked out the way he came, leaving behind only the echo of truth, spoken without arrogance. Su-jin stood paralyzed. She looked around at the staff, at the customers, at the faces that now stared at her with something far colder than discomfort: recognition. The socialite, the girl from the video, the one who had humiliated the chairman's daughter. She turned to leave, but her steps were hesitant. No one stopped her. No one spoke to her. And that silence was louder than any insult. Minseo returned to her station. She didn't bask in the moment, didn't glance at Su-jin, didn't say anything at all. She simply picked up the brooch she had placed down moments earlier, adjusted its position slightly, and moved on. But inside her, something had shifted. Not power, not revenge, but peace. The truth was no longer hidden, and she no longer had to carry it alone. The fallout did not come with headlines or media frenzy. It came with emails, meetings, legal consultations behind closed doors. Within 48 hours of Dong-hae Lee's quiet visit to Belle Étoile, Gangnam, the entire infrastructure of the boutique's management network began to realign. At corporate headquarters, an internal memo was circulated, discreet but absolute. Effective immediately, Belle Étoile locations will undergo personnel reviews and culture audits. Compliance with ethical conduct policies will be prioritized. Above client relationships, those found complicit in recent violations will face reassignment or dismissal. It was not phrased as a threat. It was a declaration of principle. Across Seoul, boutique managers whispered nervously in private group chats. Some sent panicked messages to mentors or allies in the executive ranks. Others quietly updated their resumes. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone knew who Minseo Lee was now. And everyone understood that something fundamental had changed. At the Gangnam boutique, the transformation was swift. New staff protocols were introduced, not performative but enforced. Monthly evaluations now included peer reviews. Clients with a history of abusive behavior were flagged in the system and referred to a dedicated team before being allowed future appointments. The hierarchy that once protected problematic VIPs dissolved under the weight of a single unspoken message: status is no longer immunity. For Minseo, the days that followed her father's visit were a surreal mixture of tension and release. She continued working as before, refusing to reduce herself to a symbol or an exception. She folded scarves, greeted customers, and trained. A new junior assistant with the same patience she had always shown. But now every step she took seemed to ripple. Staff moved with more awareness, clients approached with more civility. And Su-jin Kang had not returned. She had vanished. The news cycle, carefully managed by both the Kang family and the Lee Han group, never exposed names publicly. But within the social elite of Seoul, reputations traveled faster than official channels. Su-jin's name became radioactive. Brands distanced themselves, invitations ceased. Even her family's powerful allies now avoided association, wary of what might still surface. Behind the scenes, Dong-hae Lee made no further statements. He issued no punishments in public, but his reach extended like the roots of a mountain, invisible, unshakable. The silence he commanded had more impact than 1,000 headlines. 3 days after his visit to the boutique, his assistant presented him with a thick folder: documentation of the internal reforms, the policy revisions, and a list of employees who had chosen to resign voluntarily rather than undergo review. Dong-hae flipped through the pages slowly. He stopped on a printed message sent anonymously through the company's new feedback platform. "I've worked in retail for 16 years. I never thought I'd see the day someone stood up for us like that. I didn't know who she was. I just knew she was better than all of us that day." He folded the page and placed it in his drawer, next to the letter Minseo had written 2 years earlier. Meanwhile, Minseo received a call. It wasn't from corporate. It was from her father. They hadn't spoken directly since his visit to the boutique. She had avoided initiating contact, unsure of what to say. But now his voice on the line was quiet and even. "I'd like to see you. She hesitated. He continued, "Not to talk about the company or the video, just you." That evening they met at a quiet restaurant near the Han River. It was the same place they had dined on her 18th birthday, before she moved out. They sat across from each other in silence for a moment. Then Dong-hae reached into his pocket and pulled out the old letter, the one she had written before starting university. "I kept this," he said. She nodded, unsure what to say. "I didn't step in to protect you," he continued, "because I believed in your strength. But I also realize now that sometimes strength needs support." She looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. "I wasn't angry because you were humiliated," he said softly. "I was angry because you felt you couldn't ask for help." That was the wound neither of them had spoken aloud. "I didn't want to be a burden," Min-seo replied, "or seem like I had failed your expectations." Dong-hae's expression softened. "You never failed them. You exceeded them in ways I never prepared for." The words hung in the air, quiet and healing. They ate in silence for a while after that, the noise of the city a distant murmur. When dinner ended, Dong-hae stood, took his coat, and before leaving turned to her once more. "You don't have to stay at the boutique." "I know. But if you do—" She waited. "I want you to do it not as someone hiding, but as someone who leads." That night, Min-seo walked home with the wind at her back and a new kind of clarity in her chest. By the time she entered her apartment, a message was waiting in her inbox from Ms. Kwon. Per instructions from executive management, Min-seo Lee is to be promoted to assistant brand director of the Gangnam boutique, effective immediately. Your dedication has not gone unnoticed. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she smiled, not because she had been recognized, but because, for the first time, she didn't feel invisible anymore. The office at the back of Belle Étoile. Gangnam had never been luxurious. A small desk, a modest window, a computer terminal that lagged during inventory updates. But now the name on the frosted glass door had changed. Min-seo Lee, Assistant Brand Director. It wasn't large, and it wasn't bold. Just clean, elegant lettering, much like the woman herself. Most customers never saw it. Most staff still hesitated before knocking, as if the title itself radiated a new kind of gravity. But Min-seo didn't act differently. She still arrived early, still offered to help on the floor when things got busy, and still made her own tea in the staff kitchen. Yet everything around her had shifted. Meetings now paused when she entered. Staff listened when she spoke. The boutique no longer whispered behind her back. It listened to her in silence, but not all changes came easily. A week into her new role, Min-seo sat alone in her office reviewing client satisfaction reports when her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her chest tighten. "Dong-hae Lee," she answered. "I heard your first week went smoothly," he said. Voice light but attentive. "It's been full," she replied, not sure what else to say. "I know the adjustment isn't just professional," he said. "I wanted to see how you're really doing." There was a long pause. "I'm proud," she said at last, "but also exhausted. Everyone looks at me differently now. Some with admiration, some with fear. It's hard to know which is honest." Dong-hae didn't interrupt. She continued. "I earned this role, but I didn't choose to reveal who I was. That part was taken from me, and now I feel like I have to prove I deserve it all over again." "You don't," he said quietly, "but I understand why you feel that way." He hesitated before adding, "Do you want to step back? I can reassign you." Quietly, without consequence. Min-seo shook her head. "No, if I step back now, it'll look like everything was a performance. That I needed protection, I don't want that." "You never did," he murmured. They spoke a while longer, but when the call ended, Min-seo didn't feel lighter. She felt more determined. Her office still felt like borrowed space. But every day she claimed a little more of it. She began introducing subtle changes, not flashy but meaningful. She restructured the employee review system, ensuring that performance was measured not just by sales, but by collaboration and conduct. She launched weekly feedback circles, where every staff member could voice concerns without hierarchy. She insisted on shadowing each role, from cashier to stockroom, to understand their challenges firsthand. And people noticed. Clients who once breezed in and out now lingered to chat. Staff began asking for her opinion, not because of her last name, but because they trusted her insight. The boutique's morale began to shift, the air clearer, the unspoken tensions lighter. But at home, Minseo still carried the weight. One evening, as she folded laundry in her apartment, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Jisoo standing awkwardly with a box of pastries. "I wasn't sure if I should come," Jisoo said, "but I wanted to say something, properly." Minseo stepped aside to let her in. They sat at the small kitchen table, the box unopened between them. "I knew what Soo-jin was doing was wrong," Jisoo began, "but I was scared. She's powerful. I didn't want to get involved. And when you were sent to the back, I should have spoken up. I didn't. I'm sorry." Minseo listened quietly, then said, "You're speaking now. That doesn't erase it." "No," Minseo agreed, "but it changes what comes next." Jisoo looked up. "How do you do it? Keep showing up like nothing happened?" Minseo smiled faintly. "Because I know who I am, even when others don't." A few days later, Donghae requested to meet again, this time at the company's main headquarters. She expected another private conversation. Instead, she was led to a mid-level conference room, where 3 members of the executive team sat waiting. Her father entered last. "I brought you here because I want you to see something," he said. He handed her a portfolio. Inside were documents, not about Belle Étoile, but about a new initiative, Project Overture, a company-wide cultural reform program designed to re-evaluate employee treatment, client interaction standards, and internal accountability. The blueprint included diversity training, emotional intelligence workshops, and anonymous conflict resolution pathways. "It's still in the pilot phase," Donghae explained, "but it's inspired by what happened, by you." Minseo turned the pages slowly. "Do you want to lead it?" he asked. "Not as the chairman's daughter, but as the person who proved what quiet leadership looks like." She looked up, surprised. "You're serious?" "Entirely." Minseo closed the folder. "I'll help design it," she said, "but I wanted to start with the stores, the people who were invisible like I was." Donghae nodded. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." As she left the building that afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The city below buzzed on, unaware of the quiet shift taking place above. Minseo didn't feel overwhelmed anymore. She felt ready. Months passed. The story that had begun in a quiet boutique in Gangnam with a cruel comment and a silent girl had transformed the very foundation of one of Korea's most revered luxury empires. But there were no grand announcements, no viral campaigns, only the slow, deliberate ripple of change, guided not by declarations, but by quiet acts of leadership. Minseo Lee now moved differently through the halls of Lee Han Group. She no longer avoided eye contact with executives. She no longer hid behind her title, and yet she had not changed the way she dressed, or how she spoke, or how she treated those around her. The name on her ID badge was no longer hidden, but it carried no embellishments, just her name, just the truth. As assistant brand director, she had launched the first wave of the Project Overture pilot across selected boutiques. But more than that, she chose to lead by presence. Unannounced, she began visiting locations across the country, sometimes as herself, sometimes in disguise, wearing the same plain cream blouse and low heels she had worn the day Soo-jin humiliated her. She observed. She listened. She stood beside stockroom clerks and cashiers, not to test them, but to understand them. And what she found was what she already knew. Most people didn't ask for titles. They asked for dignity. They didn't crave power. They craved fairness. The program worked because it didn't try to correct people from the top down. It worked because Minseo designed it from the ground up, from the same floor she had once stood on, folding scarves while strangers laughed behind her. At Belle Étoile Gangnam, the change was even more profound. Turnover dropped, staff morale improved. Clients commented on the warmth of the environment, on the professionalism that was now paired with a deeper sense of mutual respect. Employees felt seen, not because of policy, but because the one in charge had once been one of them. The boutique had become a model, and Minseo had become a quiet legend. But not everyone remained. Sujin Kang never returned to Belle Étoile. After her forced public apology, she vanished from social media and the social circuit. Rumors spread about her family imposing a kind of internal exile, about luxury brands cutting ties, about longtime friends disappearing overnight. Nothing was confirmed. She was simply gone. One day, months later, Minseo received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I've learned what it feels like to be ignored, and I understand now. I was wrong. Not just that day. Always. I hope one day you'll believe I'm trying to change." There was no name signed, but Minseo recognized the handwriting. She didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because forgiveness, like respect, is not something to be forced. It comes in its own time, or not at all. Instead, she folded the note and placed it in her drawer between her promotion letter and the project blueprint, a reminder of what had been and what should never be again. On a cool spring morning, as cherry blossoms began to scatter across the sidewalks of Seoul, Minseo stood outside a newly renovated Belle Étoile in Busan. The regional team awaited her inside, eager to showcase the transformation. But before stepping in, she paused, watching the wind carry a flurry of petals across the street. She thought of the girl she had been, small, silent, determined. She thought of the woman she had become, still quiet, but no longer hidden. That night, she walked home through the city, unnoticed in the crowd, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't trying to disappear. She was simply herself. No cameras, no secrets, no need to prove anything. Respect, she had learned, was not inherited. It was earned, every hour, every conversation, every act of integrity. And she had earned hers, not by being the daughter of a powerful man, but by being exactly who she always had been, the right person even when no one was watching.